of the South, Jimmy Hart. I'm, for one, am certainly anxious to find out who, in fact, is the #1 challenger now that Brutus the Barber Beefcake has been shelved temporarily.
No question about it, but it doesn't look like the honky.
Nobody sent any word up to us.
Nothing to us, brother. The honky tonk man doesn't care.
His opponent.
You don't even want to know.
Here it comes. Who is his opponent? Come on, Howard. Howard doesn't even know.
Howard Finkel, the announcer, doesn't know. Come on, brother. Let's get it together.
Shook his head.
Get me somebody out here to wrestle. I don't care who it is.
Don't say that, brother. Don't say that, my man. There's some people back there in the locker room that would take this man apart.
We're all waiting here with anticipation as to who the opponent will be. Well, maybe we haven't got an opponent.
Well, maybe we have an opponent, but, maybe he's still lacing up his boots. Who knows, man?
Wait a minute. Somebody's music.
That's familiar music, brother.
They've exploded here in the garden. I don't see anybody yet.
Here is the challenger.
It's the Ultimate Warrior.
One man. Oh, look at him attack.
This place has gone bananas.
Ultimate Warrior, Lord. The Gorilla Monsoon. They're going to take over, man. That's what you do when you want something. You go out and get it, baby.
Ultimate Warrior exploding here on the Honky Tonk Man Beautiful Fly Tackle. The bell is gone and it's officially underway.
Warrior doesn't know what to do. He's so excited.
The title definitely up for grabs here.
Oh, we can get a new champion right now, Gorilla Monsoon. Right now, brother, we can get a new champion. I'm here to tell you.
Flash hooks the leg.
That's it.
History has been made here.
I love it.
Look at this place go bananas.
Pandemonium has run wild. It's Madison Square Garden, my man.
History once again made here in Madison Square Garden.
The winner of this contest, and Intercontinental Champion, the Ultimate Warrior.
It had to be record time, Gorilla Monsoon. It had to be record time, brother.
It is unbelievable. The garden has gone strictly bananas.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Radulich, the mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm depressed. Tonight, myself and co-host Gavin Napier of thecasualheroes.net are going to spend a little bit of time remembering one of my childhood heroes, the recently departed Jim Hellwig, a.k.a. the Ultimate Warrior. How you doing tonight, Gavin?
Well, once again, it's tough to be a wrestling fan. I made a remark to one of my friends a couple of years ago when we were talking about why wrestling doesn't get more mainstream coverage. And the question I asked him, when was the last time something made you proud to be a wrestling fan? Because all too often the things that gather the most attention in this sport or form of sports entertainment, however you wish to refer to it as, are things like what we're going to talk about tonight, and that's one of the superstars and the legends of the sport being gone at far too young of an age.
I don't know if I really wanted to try to keep this podcast, all 30 minutes of it, try to remember the good times. I mean, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, but as I said, he was one of my very few childhood heroes. And when I say few, I don't idolize many people. I didn't as a kid. I've always been rather cynical, so even as a kid. And I didn't have a lot of heroes growing up, but there were wrestlers and then there were comic book heroes, and he was one that was kind of both for me. So I want to spend this time saying positive things and kind of remembering why I was blessed to be a fan of his as a child. But it would I'm going to throw it out there, and I'll let you decide whether or not you even want to address this. It's funny you mention sometimes, not necessarily being ashamed of being a wrestling fan, but feeling like the only time it ever gets mainstream attention is when something tragic happens or something awful. And lo and behold, tragedy strikes. There's Nancy Grace snooping around the gravesite, ready to pee on it, lift a leg, pee right on the grave, of yet another dead wrestler. I'll never quite forgive Nancy Grace for how she mishandled the Chris Benoit murders. I mean, I haven't seen such bad reporting on a quote-unquote professional level in my life. And I watch a lot of Fox News. But they just ran a story on the death of the Ultimate Warrior, and in a lot of ways it might have been far worse. So I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, but it's out there. It's certainly on my mind, but I would also want to spend the minutes that we have on this show just kind of talking about the good times, the Ultimate Warrior.
The only thing that I will say about Nancy Grace is that she is a sensationalist hack in every sense of the word, not just with this, but with every story that she covers. If it is an adorable white girl that has been abducted, or if there is some faux outrage to be manufactured over any given situation, she'll do it. And I don't feel like she is worthy of discussion beyond what I'm about to say. At work, every so often, a topic will come up to kill the hours, and one of the topics that we come up with is, all right, you've got 3 people that are on television. You can punch them in the face mid-sentence. Who are your top 3? Nancy Grace has been number 1 with a bullet for me for years. And the idea of interrupting her exaggerated Southern drawl with a well-timed fist to the neck is just, it's almost euphoric to even think about it. I think Diamond Dallas Page did an excellent job of standing up for the culture of wrestling and how it has changed, and for the Warrior as best he could given the circumstances. Beyond that, I'm like you. I would much rather remember things like SummerSlam 1988 and one of the loudest crowds that I can possibly remember, in a moment that I take a little bit more joy from after being forced to interact with the Honky Tonk Man this past week. And it truly began what would be a meteoric rise, not just into superstardom, but into being one of the great personalities in professional wrestling history.
I remember the day that he won the Intercontinental title clear as day. I actually didn't see it live. I actually just watched video of it over and over and over again. But people may know from listening to other podcasts, I grew up on Long Island, New York, in Nassau County, both sides of it. And my grandparents lived in a town called Massapequa, which is where Jerry Seinfeld is from. And I remember being at their house and kind of walking around their neighborhood. I think I was headed to the Sunrise Mall at the time, and I had made a friend in the neighborhood, and he saw me walking because I would have to walk past his house in order to jump the fence to get to the mall. And he was like, "Hey, did you hear?" And this had to have been on a Sunday if it was at SummerSlam. And he said, "Did you hear what happened?" And I said, "No, what?" He's like, "The Ultimate Warrior just ran down to the ring, jumped on the Honky Tonk Man, and won the Intercontinental title in like 30 seconds. And if you'll remember, the Honky Tonk Man had been Intercontinental Champion for like an eon. So I was floored. And I'm probably in like junior high when this happened. 1988, yeah, I'm like 12 at this point. So I was amazed. I was floored. I couldn't believe it. I was upset that I didn't get a chance to watch it. But that's one of my earliest memories of the Ultimate Warrior. I bring up growing up in New York because my first introduction to pro wrestling, and this is why whenever we do drafts and have these conversations with old, longtime wrestling fans, I'm like Jed and kind of stand out away from the rest of you guys because I didn't grow up with Southern wrestling. I always thought the NWA, what little bit I saw of it, or WCW Saturday Night, looked cheesy, looked like a terrible television product. There was nothing better than the slick production of WWF Superstars on Channel 5 Saturday afternoons at 12 o'clock. And when I say I didn't have any heroes growing up, I wasn't a sports kid. My father wasn't into sports at all, so he didn't watch any. And I kind of found wrestling on my own, just watching Saturday morning cartoons and letting the TV stay on till 12, and then seeing these really colorful, godlike men running around, smashing each other. And my father always, I'll tell the story a little bit later about WrestleMania XXX, but my father always taking an opportunity to tell me that wrestling was fake, and I didn't care. It was the best thing since comic books. And I would watch, and then this guy came on, and he ran down to the ring, tassels flailing in the wind, face painted colorfully, wild hair just going everywhere, and he'd kick the crap out of people and run right back again. And he was my hero. Like I said, I didn't watch baseball, didn't watch football. I watched wrestling. That was it. And that guy was the best. And I know cynical wrestling fans hear someone like me say that and go, really? Not Rick Rude, not Kurt Hennig, not Bret Hart. No, that guy, really? And well, don't underestimate the power of hero worship. What about you, Gavin?
I remember the Warrior when he was still the Dingo Warrior in World Class. And because I was introduced to Southern-style wrestling and had the availability to watch World Class Championship Wrestling out of Texas, I remember the Dingo Warrior from as far back as 1986. And I remember when he made his way to the World Wrestling Federation. And I remember even at the time, I didn't understand it as well then as I do now, but I understood that this guy was going to be important. And looking back at it, he was everything that Vince McMahon wanted in 1988. He was young. He was absolutely full of energy. He was jacked beyond belief. And he had the one thing that makes a superstar. It's not work rate. It's not psychology. It's not great promos. It's not even a great entrance. It's that undefinable it. He had it. It didn't matter if he was rambling nonsensibly. It didn't matter if he was running to the ring like his head was on fire. It didn't matter if he was stiffing people in the Adam's apple with one clothesline after another. It didn't matter what he was doing. When he was on the screen, you couldn't turn away. And I guarantee you that if you go to Tyson Kidd or Dean Malenko or Bret Hart, or maybe not Bret because Bret did everything better than everybody, but if you go to a large portion of these work rate guys and you tell them, all right, we're going to dumb you down to 5 moves, but I guarantee you that you will have the indefinable quality that forces people to watch you from the moment you're on the screen until the moment you leave, and you will become a multimillionaire and you will main event WrestleMania where you make that trade. They will take the Ultimate Warrior's career in a heartbeat because he had it. And in many ways, he was the child-friendly version of the Road Warriors because the Road Warriors were very dark. They were black and red. They were leather and metal and spikes, and they ran to the ring and they beat people up and they left. The Ultimate Warrior was neon, day-glow, bike tassels, just a swirl of color. And he ran to the ring and he beat people up and he left. And so he was the natural evolution of the business.
If you go watch the Avengers and you look at one of the final battle scene with the alien army, and the shot of them, the 360-degree pan around of all of the Avengers, if the Ultimate Warrior had run into frame, you wouldn't have even blinked. He would have fit among all of the color and fantastic costumes and what they were trying to tell you with that movie, which is all of these fantastic, powerful individuals are there to protect the Earth from crazy aliens and an angry god. If the Ultimate Warrior ran into frame and just started punching people, you'd be like, yeah, he fits totally. He was, if you're trying to pitch a child-friendly wrestling program and you want superheroes, you couldn't have gotten any better than the Ultimate Warrior, and I think that was the attraction for me. Much ado has been made of his promos, which you even said that were not great. They were rambling, they were nonsensical, but I'll tell you, I'm very much, this isn't kind of like Long Road to Ruin tonight where I'm going to deconstruct things. I'm just kind of vomiting onto the microphone and sharing my feelings about him and my memories. And I remember as a kid listening to a lot of wrestlers talk, and I'd be bored. I was much more interested in the matches. See, it's funny because years later I'd be much more interested in the promos, but that's because I thought everyone was going to shoot every Monday night. Thank you, Scott Hall. But I remember back when I was a kid, I was much less interested in the promos because everyone sounded like Hulk Hogan. Everyone just sort of rambled and, made claims they were going to do this or that, and I was like, oh, who cares? And then the Ultimate Warrior would deliver a promo, of which I understood none of it. But I couldn't stop listening. Whatever it was he was going on about, I mean, this is in the era of VCRs, and I would actually tape Superstars so that I could go back and listen to his promos again and again and again and try to figure out what the hell that man was saying. I didn't do that with anybody else. Did not care. That's the thing about him, is that he had such charisma and he had such a television presence that you couldn't help but look away. We probably talk about WrestleMania 6. One thing I'll say about this before I turn it over to you in sort of the interest of time here is I remember, again, my father never took an opportunity, never missed an opportunity to remind me that wrestling was fake. I remember Randy Macho Man Savage jumping off the top rope, landing that famous elbow of his, and my father looking squarely at me and going, "You do realize that if a person did that in real life, they'd kill you, right?" Thanks, Dad. So if anyone wonders why I behave the way I do or say the things that I do, blame my father. But I remember my friend Dave's christening, confirmation. That's what you do when you're 13 and you're Catholic. I remember my friend Dave's confirmation, and wrestling was one of those things that the kids watched and the adults didn't pay any attention to. But at WrestleMania 6 in Dave's basement, every adult male and every kid in that basement who was there for this party watched Hogan and the Warrior. For whatever, as much as the adults were like making fun of it, and the kids were absolutely transfixed on that match, no one looked away. Everybody wanted to see what was going to happen. Because for the first time among, casual people or people who didn't really watch all that often, you didn't know who was going to win that one. A couple of the adults were like, oh, come on, doesn't Hulk Hogan have to win? And all the kids were like, no, this is the Warriors' time. Don't you understand? It doesn't even matter how the match went. I just remember the emotion in the room and the interest level from the people that were there.
WrestleMania 6 was a very special moment in wrestling history. It absolutely ranks up there with Hogan and Andre at WrestleMania 3. For me, Ric Flair at the 1992 Royal Rumble. It was one of those moments where you just had the feeling that things were changing. And that's no knock against Hogan, because that was in 1990, and Hogan certainly proved that he had a lot of drawing power left in the tank. But the industry was changing, and Vince was going to roll the dice with the Warrior. And I don't want to turn this into a situation where I'm an apologist for all of the things that I've criticized the Warrior for through the years just because he's passed at a young age. This is still the guy that beat the crap out of Andre the Giant in the ring until Andre punched him in the face. And this is still the guy that a lot of people maintained was very aloof in the locker room, didn't associate with a lot of the workers, and that's disputed, and it was disputed by Warrior himself. But this guy wasn't perfect. Nobody in the wrestling industry or beyond the wrestling industry is. But WrestleMania 6 is one of those iconic moments. And when you see Hogan go up for the leg drop and you see the Warrior start to roll out of the way, then you can feel the shift beginning. And it's as simple as hitting the ropes, a big splash, 1, 2, 3, and you've got a moment that is burned into the history books forever. You know, Hogan lost to other people through the years. He lost to Yokozuna. It didn't feel like that match with Warrior. He lost to Sting in WCW, and it didn't feel like when he lost to Warrior. That was a big moment.
He lost to Andre the Giant.
He did lose to Andre the Giant. And
yeah, he lost to Andre the Giant on Saturday night's main event, and then he said, I'll surrender the title, but this will be awfully. And
none of those had that same feeling as that moment at WrestleMania 6 in Toronto with the Warrior. As big as this moment was, it's not my favorite Warrior match, and neither is the Honky Tonk Man match that you played the entirety of, because it's beautiful and its brevity. My favorite Ultimate Warrior match, and it's not even a particularly good match, but in December of 1998, when Warrior had come to WCW for what would ultimately be an ill-fated and ill-received run, there was one match that just sort of got thrown in out of nowhere, and it was so random because it was WCW. But for one night in December of 1998, on one side of the ring, you had Hulk Hogan and Bret Hart teaming up. And on the other side of the ring, 15 years removed from the last time it happened, are Ultimate Warrior and Sting standing side by side as the Blade Runners. And I remember being 18 years old, getting ready to turn 19 in a month or so, and watching this match and just thinking how surreal it was to see those two together one more time. And even then, seeing Warrior and Sting side by side, it felt like this very important thing. It felt like a big moment. And I think, for better or worse, for everything else that he did throughout his career, for all of the people that he rubbed the wrong way, and for the classic matches that he had, and for the classic matches that he didn't have, I think that's the one thing that you can say about Warrior. He understood big moments, and he knew how to carry his part in them. And that goes a long way, not just in wrestling, but in any walk of life. If you understand how to behave yourself in big moments, then you're going to leave a lasting impression on a lot of people's minds. And like Warrior said in what has ultimately become a very prescient last speech to his fans on Monday Night Raw this week, that's the best you can.
Which we're going to hear a little bit later.
Yeah, if you can make an impression in somebody's mind and they remember you and what you've done after you're gone, then you've lived a good life.
I want to talk a little bit about another death in wrestling because it relates to this one. There have been a lot of, as we saw on Nancy Grace tonight, there have been a lot of people who have died in professional wrestling. Some very sad ones, some very expected ones, some that were shocking, some that were not so shocking. And there's only one other one that made me feel like I felt this morning when I woke up at 3:30 this morning, and my wife said, look, I want to tell you before you go back to sleep again, before you read it on the internet, the Ultimate Warrior is dead. And I just want to tell you because I know what's going to happen if you read later on. And the wrestler that I'm talking about, who, when he died, I felt the way that I felt this morning, probably felt worse, was Owen Hart. Because of all the guys that have died, either by suicide, old age, drug addiction, car wreck, rest in peace, Savage. There were very few wrestlers that were beloved to me, but two that I felt just absolutely awful that they were gone so suddenly. I mean, Owen Hart was the absolute worst. And for those living under a rock, Owen Hart died in a failed in an accident where his harness he was being suspended from the ceiling, and his harness came undone, and he fell to his death. And I remember I was living in California at the time, and I watched the pay-per-view that happened on, and I watched the next night on Raw as they did the tribute to Owen Hart. And I remember my friend John, formerly of The Right Hook, we didn't talk. We just called each other, and we stayed on the phone through the whole Monday Night Raw after Owen's death and just cried, both of us, in tears, grown men, both of us out of college, by the way, just crying the entire episode and not talking to each other, just listening to each other cry. And I felt that way because what a horrible thing to happen to another human being, but also because he left behind children. And that's kind of the point that I'm getting to. You know, the Ultimate Warrior lived hard. I mean, I don't think I'm being disrespectful to say, of course the guy did steroids. He didn't do them yesterday, Nancy Grace, but he did do them. And while he didn't live as hard as some of the guys on the road, he was a wrestler, and he did his thing, and it took its toll on its body. And I think we're seeing that a lot of wrestlers don't make it past their 50s because of that. And some that do, like Jake the Snake, are apparently made of something, I don't know what, but they're made of something strong. But I want to say this. It breaks my heart to see that, you know, he comes out, he has this, he's brought back together with the WWE and Vince McMahon. Amends are made, bridges are crossed, and they're moving forward, and he comes out in the Hall of Fame, and he addresses the DVD in the most awkward Hall of Fame speech ever. And it just, okay, and he sweep that under the bridge, and he comes out on Raw, and he delivers that last final promo, and then poof, he's gone within hours after that. And while I can rationalize it in my mind because of all the things I just said, it's still like he was just there. He just like Owen was just there, and then boom, he was gone. And whatever, I'm just a fan. You know, I'm just a fan, I'm just a guy. But my heart breaks and bleeds for his two daughters that he left behind. And that, for me, is the connection to Owen.
I think when you talk about them being just gone, you know, some people are religious, some people are not religious. I've been raised in a Baptist church, and I know we're running short on time here, so I'll keep things short. But there's a verse in the New Testament
because hang on, take all the time you need. I threw in some extra time here.
Okay. There's a verse in the New Testament in James chapter 4, verse 14. It says, "How do you know what your life will be like tomorrow? Your life is like the morning fog. It's here a little while, and then it's gone." And there's another verse found in the Scripture that says, "Boast not thyself of tomorrow, for no man knows what a day might bring forth." And it becomes a lot more real when we see it happen to someone that we look up to and see. In someone like the Warriors' case, is almost superhuman. The idea that this person could indeed be mortal and taken from us very quickly, it's not easy to deal with. And I understand exactly what you're saying about how it breaks your heart for his family, because he's a young man. He should have had years left with his wife, with his kids, with his dogs, with his fans, to enjoy the fact that he had repaired this relationship with WWE. You know, people that have listened to the Casual Heroes, they know that I lost my father in October, and tomorrow will be his birthday. I understand the void that is left in the lives of his family. And it's heartbreaking. It's absolutely crushing to think of another person going through this. To me, the lesson learned, and to me, the example to take from it, and it becomes cliche because you hear so many people say it, but if anybody that we have seen in terms of celebrities or anybody else truly say this and mean it, it's embrace each day. Give it 110%, because more than anybody that I could probably point to from any walk of life, celebrity, athlete, politician, family member, friend, whatever the case may be. This was a guy that went at things 110%, and he was 100% him 100% of the time. It takes a special kind of person to stand at a commencement speech and tell a group of college students that queering don't make the world work. But he said it because he believed it. He at no point in his life did the man compromise anything that he believed for any reason. We should all be fortunate enough to have someone say that about us at the end of our lives. He also got to deliver a pretty damn fine eulogy for himself. And that's a better ending than most of us will get. If I manage to eke out something as poignant as he did in my last public statement, then it'll be a good way to go out, because the words that he spoke on Raw were relevant, they were honest, they were heartfelt, and they were 100% true. So as much as I empathize with his family and what they are going through in this sudden loss, I don't feel too badly for the Warrior, because he got a better ending than the vast majority of humanity will. And Godspeed to him.
We have just a few minutes left, and I don't want to end the podcast on sort of a somber note, because I do want to celebrate, as you're saying. I feel horrible for his children. However, part of the reason why I wanted to do this was I wanted to celebrate his life and celebrate sort of the hero worship, at least from my vantage point, that I had for him as my years of being a wrestling fan. And if I don't talk about this, I'm not going to make it through the night without being a blubbering mess. So it's not the world's greatest feud. It was certainly, from a work rate standpoint, I don't even think it was memorable. But I have to talk about, just because I saw it actually recently on the WWE Network, the Papa Shango Ultimate Warrior feud. Oh, my God. Some of the stuff they did with the Warrior, especially towards the latter end of his career with the WWE, and I don't mean his subsequent comebacks, with Triple H and Jerry the King Lawler and all that. That late 80s, early 90s run, I don't remember when they did the Papa Shango thing, but Papa Shango was during this era of really over-the-top silly characters in the WWE, and to the point where they had crossed the line from comic book superhero to silly magic people. And, of course, who could forget, WWE, I think it was a Superstars taping, where the Ultimate Warrior is giving an interview and black ink, or whatever it was, started bleeding from his forehead. I laugh every time I see that. And what was even better about that is how, God bless him, he tried to make that work. He reacted like his head was going to come off. And if nothing else, that's the one part of that feud that I remember, was Papa Shango making the Ultimate Warrior's head bleed green dye. What are some of your fun memories of Warrior?
Well, it eventually morphed into the Undertaker feud, which became the Jake Roberts feud, which gave birth to one of my favorite catchphrases of all time. That's Jake just very simply saying, "Trust me." And so I think between Hogan and Savage and Rude and the ill-received comeback in WCW, I think the feud with Jake and the Undertaker gets overlooked. Largely because of the involvement of Papa Shango and the overt silliness of it. But he certainly is more than one match or one feud. He has a body of work. Like I said, some of the matches not that great, but he certainly has a body of work that will stand up through the years.
Of course, everyone remembers fondly probably the best match, one of the best matches of his career from a wrestling standpoint, from a work rate standpoint. I think the late Randy Savage is the one that gets credit for it, but, it takes two to tango. And that, of course, was the match that I maintain should have headlined WrestleMania 8 and been a title versus career match. Of course, I'm talking about the Ultimate Warrior versus Randy Savage. And that was WrestleMania 7 I'm talking about, isn't it? Not WrestleMania 8. But either way, yeah, the Warrior Savage match where Savage retired the first time, probably his best match, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Again, it's a toss-up between that and WrestleMania 6. If somebody took either side of that argument, it'd be very difficult for me to argue against them. And I think the match where he lost the Intercontinental Championship to Rick Rude and subsequent world title defenses against Rick Rude, I thought those were excellent matches as well. Not quite up to the standard of his matches against Hogan and Savage, but at the same time, the matches against Rick Rude didn't have quite the historic significance that those two matches did.
I want to sort of take us towards the end of this podcast by sort of talking about what if. What if Hogan had gone into the woods to live deliberately and Vince McMahon had honored all of his agreements and we never have the Warrior leaving the WWE back then? Think of what could have been. WrestleMania, instead of Slaughter versus Hogan, we get Warrior versus Savage headlining WrestleMania 7. And then imagine a world where WrestleMania 8 is headlined for the title versus title, the real world champion versus the WWE champion, Ric Flair versus the Ultimate Warrior. Could you imagine how that would have gone?
I think it would have been very entertaining. Ric Flair certainly had great matches with lesser opponents throughout his career in the NWA/WCW and the World Wrestling Federation. However, I'll go one better. Let's imagine that the Ultimate Warrior endures and is an on-again, off-again world champion for the next few years. And eventually you get to a point where you're dealing with the Ultimate Warrior versus the Clique backstage. The possibilities for entertainment with the Ultimate Warrior are endless. When you think about what-if scenarios and the people that he could have dealt with had everything remained kosher between he and Vince.
I think The Undertaker, they've talked somewhat. I remember listening to, I think, The Draft, and The Undertaker sort of forged an alliance with some of the other guys in order to combat the Clique. I suspect the Warrior at one point and The Undertaker would have formed a backstage alliance to keep them in check. And Jesus Christ, I think all you need is The Undertaker and the Ultimate Warrior to put anybody to keep the balance of anything going. Last words, Gavin, and then I think we're going to close the book on remembering the Ultimate Warrior for tonight.
I think that there's, unfortunately, I think that a lot of public sentiment's going to go one of two ways against the Warrior. I think either people are going to dig their heels in and continue to falsely maintain that he wasn't as great as he was. And there's a difference between being good and being great. And if anybody wants to argue with me and tell me that the Ultimate Warrior wasn't a good wrestler, I will concede that point very quickly. The Ultimate Warrior was a great wrestler, and he was an all-time great wrestler. It has nothing to do with work rate, psychology, or anything else. The Ultimate Warrior and the fact that his name endures to this point, despite the fact that he has been invisible from the public eye for the better part of 15 years, is a testament to how great he truly was. Beneath the Warrior as a professional wrestler, there was a person. There was a man that cared enough about his life's work that he legally changed his name from James Bryan Hellwig to Warrior, so that he could continue to be who he felt he was. again, the man didn't compromise anything for anyone for any reason. Right or wrong, he stuck to his guns. It's a quality that the vast majority of society lacks in today's social climate. We should all be fortunate enough to have anyone look at us and say any of the nice things people are saying about the Warrior when we're dead and gone. I think the other danger is that we may come down with Kurt Cobain syndrome and try to paint over the ugly parts of his life and declare him to be the greatest that there ever was, and, oh, we've been so wrong all these years. It's okay to hold a negative opinion about someone after they're gone. I would encourage everyone in the days, weeks, months, and years to come, when it comes to the Ultimate Warrior, be honest with yourself. It's okay if you don't like him. You can dislike and respect someone at the same time. But understand that there's a big difference in disliking the wrestler and disliking the person. This was a man that had a family and cared very much for them. This was a man that had a strong set of principles, and he stuck to them. There's a lot of lessons to be learned and a lot of good to be taken away from the life of the man that played the Ultimate Warrior. It does my heart good to know that he mended the biggest fence of his life with Vince McMahon. In time, the hatchet can remain buried peacefully. I'm glad that he won't be erased, as so often happens when people have a feud with Vince. The world is, and professional wrestling in particular, is better for the Ultimate Warrior having been here. And I don't think I can say anything else that would add to what he said himself Monday night.
So with that said, and it's going to cut off a little bit, but here are the last public words of the Ultimate Warrior. Thank you for joining myself and Gavin. Please look for the next recording of the Casual Heroes WrestleCast. Thank you, and good night. Here is the Warrior.
Speak to me, Warriors! As I thought about what I was going to say this evening, it's been hard for me to find the words. That
this is going to be great. There you go. There's the Warrior.
Well then, you shut up, Warrior, and let me do the talking. No WWE talent becomes a legend on their own. Every man's heart one day beats its final beat. His lungs breathe their final breath. And if what that man did in his life makes the blood pulse through the body of others and makes them believe deeper in something than larger than life, then his essence, his spirit will be immortalized by the storytellers, by the loyalty, by the memory of those who honor him and make the running the man did live forever. You are the legend makers of Ultimate Warrior. In the back, I see many potential legends, some of them with warrior spirits, and you will do the same for them. You will decide if they lived with a passion and intensity, so much so that you will tell your stories and you will make them legends as well. I am Ultimate Warrior. You are the Ultimate Warrior fans. And the spirit of Ultimate Warrior will run forever.
The Ultimate Warrior, the newest member of the Hall of Fame.